The Great Depression was the worst economic downfall in modern history. So what actually caused it? And what can we learn from it before it's too late? Let's go back to where it all began.
World War I had ended. Soldier doggies came home. And with them came a booming dog economy. While the rest of the world was rebuilding, America was revving up. Factories switched from weapons to slippers. Bred doggies returned to work. Factory doggies built new machines. And for the first time, lady doggies stayed in the workforce. One doggie changed everything. Car Doggy from Detroit. He built the Doggy Mobile, a car made for everyday pups. To meet demand, he created the Pawduction line, a moving system where every doggie did one small task over and over. It worked. The Doggy Mobile's price dropped from 780 treats to just 290. By 1927, over 15 million had rolled off the line. Other doggies copied the idea. Soon, factories were pumping out singular socks, tennis balls, Fetch 3000s, everything a modern doggie could want. The consumer boom had begun. And to help pups afford it all, bank doggies handed out treat loans. Buy now, pay later. Even if you didn't have the treats yet, it was a golden age. Jazz echoed through the streets. Pups danced past curfew. And while doggies partied, from 1921 to 1929, the stock market went wild. It grew more than 6 times in size, and no one was asking why. By the mid-1920s, the shelves were full, but demand was slowing. Europe was still recovering from war. Most doggies overseas didn't have enough treats to buy all the shiny new toys America was selling. But inside the US, optimism was off the leash. Even as the dog economy softened, stock prices kept rising. Pups saw the market as an endless treat dispenser. Buy a stock. Wait. Get more treats. Word spread. Doggies started pouring everything into stocks. Savings, wages, even borrowed treats. It was called buying on margin. You'd pay just 10% up front. Borrow the rest from a bank doggie and hope the price kept climbing. And at first, it worked. Prices kept going up. Profits came easy. Confidence turned into greed. Even pups who had never touched a stock before wanted in on the action. By 1929, 40% of all US consumer debt was being used to buy stocks, which meant if the market dipped even a little, millions of pups wouldn't just lose treats, they'd owe treats they didn't have. That's when the cracks started to show. Companies weren't selling as much. The dog economy wasn't growing fast enough to justify the hype. But stock prices, still climbing, fueled by fantasy and borrowed treats. Then came the turning point. More and more pups started asking. And in a market built on belief, all it takes is a flicker of doubt to start a fire. October 24th, 1929. The day everything snapped. The market had been climbing for years, but underneath it, the dog economy was already slowing down. Factories were overstocked. Foreign doggies weren't buying. Then came the first dip. Some doggies tried to sell early, just to be safe. Others saw that, panicked, and rushed to sell too. Suddenly, everyone wanted out, because they realized something terrifying. The prices weren't real. The treats they'd borrowed couldn't be paid back. And if they didn't sell now, they might be left with nothing. That day would become known as Black Thursday. 12.9 million shares dumped. The market fell 11%. And this was only the beginning. The next week, it got worse. Black Tuesday. 16.4 million shares sold. Another 12% drop. In just 2 weeks, stocks had lost a third of their value. Margin doggies, the ones who borrowed treats to buy in, were wiped out. They didn't just lose savings, they were in debt. But this wasn't just a stock market crash. This was the shockwave that hit the entire dog economy. Because behind those collapsing prices were the banks. Bank doggies had handed out treat loans like free biscuits. And a lot of those loans weren't for homes or businesses. They were for stocks. So when stocks crashed, so did the repayments. And the banks? They started collapsing too. Back then, there was no deposit insurance. If your bank failed, your treats were just gone. Rumors spread. Panic followed. Even healthy banks were swarmed. In New York, a rumor hit the Bank of the United States. A doggy said they wouldn't let him sell his stock. Over 25,000 doggies showed up in a panic. 3 million treats were withdrawn in a day. The bank collapsed. And with it, a third of all treats lost during the Depression. Loans were called in. Banks sold everything they could to stay alive. It didn't work. In the end, 1/3 of all US banks would fail. And the dog economy was falling faster than anyone could bark. After the crash, pups were scared. They didn't trust stocks, they didn't trust banks, they didn't even trust the treats under their own paws. So they stopped spending. Doggies pulled their treats out of banks and buried them in backyards, or hid them in socks and mattresses. The money supply in the dog economy shrank by 31% between 1929 and 1933. And that's when the real damage began. When treats become scarce, their value goes up. That's called deflation. And it sounds like a good thing. But it's not. Because when treats are worth more tomorrow, pups don't spend today. When pups don't spend, businesses don't earn. When businesses don't earn, they lay off workers. And when workers lose their jobs, they stop spending too. It's a spiral, a cold one. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve just stood there. They watched the banks collapse. They watched the treats dry up. And they did nothing. President Hoover had no idea what to do. He passed tariffs to protect American farmers. But that backfired fast. 25 countries hit back with tariffs of their own. Global trade collapsed by 66% over the next 5 years, and that meant even fewer treats coming in. Industries froze. Over 9,000 banks failed. 9 million savings accounts wiped out. Unemployment hit 24.9%. 1 in 4 pups had no job. And in the middle of all this, farms dried up, crops failed. They called it the Dust Bowl. And it was the worst man-made ecological disaster in American history. Bread lines wrapped around the block. Shanty towns popped up everywhere. They called them Hoovervilles, named after the president who barked but didn't bite. By 1932, the dog economy was on life support. Millions were unemployed. Banks were gone. Hope was fading. And then, a new pup stepped in. His name was Franklin D. Roosevelt, but most just called him FDR. He promised action, relief, reform. He called it the New Deal. FDR didn't try to fix everything at once. He focused on what mattered most: getting treats flowing again and restoring trust. He created new jobs for idle paws. He built roads, parks, bridges, and hired pups to work on them. He established a minimum wage, overtime pay, unemployment insurance. For the first time, the government had a plan to protect working doggies when times got tough. But FDR didn't stop there. He tackled the banks too. He created federal deposit insurance, so that even if a bank collapsed, your treats would be protected. No more runs, no more panic, just trust. He also created the Securities and Exchange Commission, a watchdog for Wall Street. So stock prices were based on facts, not just fantasy and barks. The New Deal didn't fix everything overnight, but it stopped the bleeding. It gave the dog economy a chance to heal, and it restored confidence to pups who had lost everything. Still, it wasn't enough to fully end the Great Depression, because the thing that truly brought the dog economy back was war. In 1939, as war broke out across Europe, the dog economy was still limping along. Unemployment was high, production was low, confidence was shaky. But when the US joined the war, everything changed. Factories roared back to life. But this time, they weren't building radios or doggy mobiles. They were building tanks, planes, bullets, boots. The government poured treats into the war effort. Massive spending, massive hiring. Millions of doggies were drafted or put to work. And just like that, the unemployment rate dropped below 10% for the first time in a decade. For the first time in years, the dog economy was running at full speed. Not because of faith, but because of one simple force: raw demand. And while the war was tragic, it proved a powerful lesson. That government spending, on the right things at the right time could save an economy. When the war ended in 1945, dog economy had not only recovered, it had transformed. And so had the way doggies thought about money, markets, and mistakes. Because the Great Depression wasn't just a financial disaster. It was a warning, a lesson about greed, about bubbles, about borrowing treats you don't actually have. That lesson still matters today. Because the moment we all believe that prices only go up, that nothing can fail, that the dog economy is that's the moment we forget what came before. And when we forget, we're most at risk of repeating it.